This video we're going to look at planning communications. So we looked at an overview of what communications was, and now how do we plan the communications for the project. So process, PMBOK process 10.1 is plan communications management, and it's the process of developing an appropriate approach for communicating with each stakeholder. So your first input is that stakeholder register. So that green there indicates it's in the initiation part of the process. So way back at the start of the course, you'll remember we looked at the initiation processes, and one of them was to identify the stakeholders. Who are the people that could be affected by this project? Obviously there's the client and the project team, but then there's the neighbours, there's the future users of the what you're producing in the project and that sort of stuff. And you'll recall that we one of the outputs from that was the stakeholder register, a list of the people or organisations that are stakeholders that are interested in the project or whatever, and their contact details. So you know who the stakeholders are. So now the challenge is, what information do those stakeholders require, and how are we going to deliver it to them? Well, actually there's one in between there. So what do the stakeholders require? What are we actually going to give them? And how are we going to give them what we've decided to give them? And also when. So there's the enterprise environmental factors. So there are probably established communication channels. So within the project team, there will probably be set communication channels already established. And also you will have made contact, hopefully, with external organisations, with the council, with a person in the council, with neighbours, with community groups, whatever. And then there's the regulatory requirements as well. So you may be required to communicate with people. So for example, if you've got a consent, you're required to communicate with the consenting authority at particular times, and you're supposed to give them particular information. So that is quite important as well. And then there's the organisational process assets. These are the things that are going to help you to do it. So you will have internal communications channels both within your organisation, and you'll find them out about the client and the consultant and the other people involved in the project. Your organisation will have templates and guidelines. This is how we normally, this is what a construction plan, communication plan normally looks like. Previous projects, so you'll look at previous projects. How did we communicate in previous projects? What worked, what didn't work? And there may be communications professionals. So for a big project, you may actually hire someone who's a communications professional, whose job it is to do this communications management. So if this really spins your wheels, you can do this professionally all the time. That's all you do is communicate. And within the engineering industry, there are people that do that. That's all they do is communicate with stakeholders. Then you do a stakeholder analysis. You look at the stakeholders, you determine what information they require, you determine what influence they have over the project. So how much effort do you put in to keep them happy? And there's expert judgment. What do we need to tell these people? What don't we need to tell these people? Within our project team, who needs to know if, for example, we've changed the drawing, and how we're going to do that? So it's no use sort of the designers deciding that they're going to change a part of the design and not telling the construction team. It's no use the construction manager receiving the drawing if he doesn't give it to the guys on the ground. So there's those communications channels that need to be established and formalised, so that when there is a change, that information happens. And I think every engineer would have a story about where the communication didn't happen and they went and built something off the old drawing and either had to rip it out or accept what was there. Out of that comes a communications plan, and the communications plan sets out what you're going to communicate, who you're going to communicate it with, how you're going to communicate, what the method you're going to use is, when are you going to do it, or how frequently you're going to do it, and who's going to be responsible for it. So once again, the communication plan in this format is a to-do list for the project manager or the communications manager or the foreman, but not usually. So for each stakeholder, you communicate all the relevant information and only the relevant information. So for example, you wouldn't give a complex program breakdown to members of the public. You'd give them a bit of a summary. You wouldn't give them the complex status report. You might give them a summary of where you're at and when you're going to leave. So you need to look at what information does these people need and communicate that. You don't want to overload people with communication. Now, one of the things I mentioned before was stakeholder analysis. Once again, it costs money and time to communicate with stakeholders, so you need to decide the priority of each stakeholder, and also how much communication, how much time you're going to spend communicating with them. And so that's what the stakeholder analysis is all about, is potential stakeholders and the relationships. What are their interests and aspirations? What do they want? Some people might just want to send, have a letter sort of saying, oh, we're going to leave at this particular time, or see an advertisement in the paper, or be able to access a website which sort of tells you that information. Other people might want, like the client, might want complex reports every month or something like that. And then you also need to figure out the potential impact of each group on project success. So some people might say, oh, you know, I want you to be communicating with me every day about, you know, what's happening because I'm a neighbour and I'm really interested, and that's just too expensive to do. And you've got to decide whether you're going to do that or not. And one way of guiding that is their power and interest in the project. So that's what this this grid is all about. So you've got the people here, so you've got two axes: the power to impact the project, can they close you down or not, or are they just, they don't have any power at all, or their interest in the project, do they not really care all that much, or are they really interested in what's going on, or a particular thing that's going on. Like neighbours will be really interested when something, an activity that's going to produce noise is about to go on. So that's what the interest in the project is all about. So you've got four corners here. So the lowest one is they've got low interest in the project and low power. So that might be general members of the public, people off at a distance, they're just interested in what's going on, but it's not really affecting them all that much. And so you monitor them and you give them general updates. You might have a website, you might sort of have newspaper articles. Now the people that are right next to it, the neighbours for example, they may have a high interest in the project, but they don't have much power to influence it. They can't close you down really. So regular updates, you keep them informed. You do letter drops, meetings if they want to, workshops, website for them to get information. Then there's the other people that don't really have much interest in it except for a specific part. So for example, you might have the consenting authority, and they're just interested in, are you meeting the consent requirements? That's all they're interested in. They don't really care if you're running over budget or when you're going to start or finish. They are just interested in, are you meeting the consent requirements? WorkSafe as well, they are interested in, are you doing the work safely? They don't care if you're running over budget or if you're running over time. They just want to know if you are doing the work safely. So once again, those people, and they have the ability to close you down. So if you're not doing the work safely, WorkSafe can come onto your site and close you down. So you need to keep them satisfied. You need to provide them the information they require. This is probably more pertinent for the consenting authority. They will want to know, they want to see some quality records, you know, have you checked the concrete, have you done inspections, all that sort of stuff. So they would want that information, and you provide it to them. You provide them all the information they require, because if you do not, they will close you down. They will stop you until you give them the right information. So you don't really want it to get to that. And then there's the group that are really interested in the project and have a lot of power over it, and that would be the client, the project team, and that would be regular communication. And these are the people that you spend, you know, most of your time on. These guys as well, you spend whatever time is required to keep these people satisfied. So these are the two groups that you're really concerned with spending most of your time and effort on for your communications. So let's look at the communications management plan. So this is just a table that shows a convenient way of showing that. So it might be that this this table is all you've got, that's your communications plan, or it might be a complex document which sort of describes your communications channels and who's doing what. And so for a big project you might have a whole communications team, and a communications plan might be sort of, you know, tens of pages long. Okay, and it might have all the processes that you're undertaking. If someone rings up, what happens to that phone call, who receives it, how's the information transferred within the organisation, how do you answer it, all that sort of stuff. So for a big project, the communications plan would be a lot more than a table. but for our purposes, let's just concentrate on this table. So you need to figure out what needs to be communicated for a particular work package. Who's the audience? Who are the people that need that information? So in this case here, we've got a status report. How is the project going? So the client needs a detailed written report. He needs to know how his budget's going. He needs to know when it's going to be completed. He needs it usually monthly, so each month, and it would be the project manager that does it. The neighbours might just want a letter or something on the website or a newspaper advertisement or something like that, just updating them, you know, what's going on, because they're interested, and what they really want to know is when are you going to go away. And the general community might want information, so you might have different methods of doing it. You might have newspaper articles. So each line has a different thing. So you can see the general community, we're communicating with them with a newspaper advertisement and a web page. So you've got them on different lines, and it might be different people doing it, and there might be different times that you're doing it. So you communicate all the relevant information and only the relevant information. So you need to decide what they need to know and give them that. But you also need to decide what's confidential and they shouldn't know. They should. So for example, the financial status of the project is really not something you want to make public because it's commercially sensitive. So you need to make those decisions as well. There's also a communications matrix. So this sets out when you produce something, when you produce a document, who are the people that need to approve it, who needs to review it, and who needs to just receive information there. So once again, this is setting out communication, who needs to know what, and what actual actions they need to take. So the communications matrix is also something you might include.